What are you reporting?
I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
A good-sized man, or something that looks like a man.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. I don't know what it was.
Welcome to Sasquatch Hypotheses.
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Tia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
Son of a bitch is about 6'9".
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
And the guy is on foot.
I don't know what... It's a big, real big person.
But it is a person.
Yeah, I'd say it was a person, somebody really big. But he's all in black.
Is he a black male or a white male? Did you actually see whether, or was he just wearing black?
He's all black and he's big. He is big.
Evening, folks. Welcome to Sasquatch Hypotheses. I know my show has been quiet for quite some time, about a year, I guess. I've had a lot of things going on in my personal life, had some family issues, some health issues, you name it. A whole lot of things have been going on this last year. Anyway, all of that is pretty much settled down, although I'm currently waiting to have surgery to have my left bicep reattached to my arm. It ripped loose when I was doing something at work in my day job. Anyway, I've decided to go ahead and start redoing the show and try to keep it pretty regular from now on. There might be some interruptions during the surgery, but other than that, it should be pretty regular. Anyway, one of the things I had planned to do last year was to do another show that expands on, if you've watched the or listened to the show concerning Eye to Eye with Sasquatch. That was actually an edited version that I pulled down off of Sasquatch Chronicles with some commentary from in there. But I'm going to expand on the whole Eye to Eye with Sasquatch and go into some other things. I've actually had a couple of other incidents with Sasquatch encounters, however you want to look at it, where I guess in one of them I actually did see the Sasquatch, but only the shadow figure of him. But the summer that I saw the Sasquatch looking through the window, I actually had another encounter, which I didn't realize actually until I was being interviewed by Wes and Will. And I believe it was Will brought up a question about some other things that had gone on that same summer, and that's what made me realize that there was a couple other things. So I'll start off with what occurred before I saw the Sasquatch in the window, because I saw the Sasquatch in the window. It was actually a couple of days before I left, but prior to that, I had a couple of other things happen. Now, what it was is when I was younger, my mother used to take me and my sister down to spend the summer with my grandmother, who we called Granny. They were hillbillies, basically. I mean, they still are that side of the family that live in that area. I mean, things are a little more, modern than that these days, of course, because that's what happens as time goes by. But back then, it was very small community. I was either related to or knew pretty much everybody that lived for miles around there. It was in the Blue Ridge Mountains in the southwestern corner of Virginia in Lee County. And Granny lived back in a holler in an old farmhouse. And in order to get there, just to give you an idea of how secluded this house was, you would come off of a gravel road onto another gravel road, and then you had to drive down in a ditch across a creek. The creek wasn't real deep. I mean, a regular car could drive across it. But a regular car would have, car or truck, you would have to go at an angle because it was a ditch in order to go down into the creek and back up the bank on the other side. And then you'd drive past this old barn, and you would drive basically into the trees. There would be a spot in the trees where you could tell that people were driving. In the summertime it was like this. In the wintertime it was probably more obvious that the dirt road went back in the trees. But in the summertime it was kind of thick, and you would drive into the trees, and they would be, scraping up the side of the car and all of that as you drove through. And you drive back in there probably, probably 50 to 100 yards through the trees. And you would come to an opening, a clearing, which was Granny's front yard. And there would be the house. And if you kept going up that dirt road, it would go past Granny's house, probably another 50 yards, and there would be another barn back there behind the house. So that was the environment. And it was surrounded by trees. I mean, it isn't today. I've actually looked at it on Google Earth, and it's cleared out a bit there, and somebody's built a new house there. Granny's old house is still there. It wasn't actually her house. She was renting it from somebody, but, the old house she was renting at the time is still there. I'm sure it's dilapidated and disused at this point. But there's a new house there where the first barn you pass going back in there seems to be gone, and now there's a house there. And then there's some land where somebody has planted some crops or whatever. So it's not completely surrounded by trees anymore. There's a planted field on the side where the road used to go back to the barn behind her house. There's now a planted field there. So it's not completely surrounded by trees anymore. But it was kind of up on the side of a little finger ridge that went up into the mountain. And back then there was probably nobody the nearest house was probably a quarter of a mile away up on the gravel road that went along that creek you had to drive across. I'm sure this is all clear as mud to you. But anyway, the whole idea is that it was secluded. And it was up basically on the side of a mountain. If you went up the finger ridge, you would basically have to climb up probably, 500 to 1,000 feet before you'd hit a road at the top of the ridge. And that was the environment back then. This was about 1978. So we were staying with Granny, and I used to love to go out and explore the woods back there, the forest that would grow along the side of this mountain. The whole area was a valley, with mountains on either side, and it had a road that went. It was a single lane road, basically. It was two-way traffic, but a single lane road that ran across a bigger creek. And then you would go off on gravel roads that would, go back in hollers as you went down this creek road. And Granny lived off of one of these gravel roads. And So I used to like to walk along the finger ridges, which is basically you would go up and down these little finger ridges into hollers all along the side of this larger mountain. And I would do that all the time. I was, let's see, what was I back then? I've been 13 years old. Now, Granny had this little dog. It was a poodle, I think. Or some kind of poodle mutt kind of thing. And this dog really liked me, and it would follow me everywhere I went. It was probably, I don't know, a year or 2 years old, something like that. Probably 3 years. And it would follow me along when I would walk around out in the woods. Well, there was one time I was walking, and my sister and my cousins had gone to one of my other cousins' houses, which I knew was down along the creek, the main creek road. Probably a couple of miles. I didn't really know how far it was. I just knew if I walked along the mountain, along the woods, on the side of the mountain, long enough, I'd end up running into their house. So I just took off. I decided I didn't go with them. I decided to go ahead and meet up with them later on in the day. And it turned out it was a little bit farther than I thought. It was more like 4 or 5 miles up the road. So it took me quite a while. I started somewhere around noon. I didn't get there until it was dark. Just in time, probably maybe an hour before we all got driven back to Granny's. So, I mean, but I didn't mind. It was the whole afternoon walking along in the woods and stuff. I kind of enjoyed it. I knew we had black bears that came down in there. But I basically grew up in the city, and what I knew of black bears was that basically if you didn't bother them, they wouldn't bother you, and that kind of thing. I wasn't that informed that some of them will bother you regardless, but basically what Granny and them said was, if there's ever one around there, just stay away from it, and if you don't bother it, it won't bother you. So I wasn't too worried about it. And that was about the only thing that, as far as I knew, you had to worry about back in those woods. So I was walking down through the woods, and this dog was walking with me. And I kept telling the dog to go back, but it wouldn't. It kept following me. So we were walking along. The dog was walking in front of me. And I was hearing, sticks crack and stuff like that, but I kind of ignored it. I was from the city up in Boston, and my only experience in the country was the summers I'd spent at Granny's, which was quite a few. I mean, we started staying with Granny every summer since I was 6 years old, so those 6-7 years I spent walking around in these woods and stuff. And there's all kinds of critters up there, squirrels and groundhogs and that kind of thing. So when I hear the sticks snapping and crackling and all that stuff, I just blew it off as, the wind in the trees, or, some kind of an animal, a raccoon or whatever, a groundhog messing around. But the little dog kept stopping, and it kept looking off to my right and behind me. And I'd stop and I'd look around, and I wouldn't hear anything. Wouldn't see anything, nothing like that. And I'd keep going, and we'd walk on a little bit longer, and the dog would stop, and it would keep looking. And this happened basically the entire way, all the way to my cousin's house. Now, when it got dark, when it started getting dark, it was basically dusk, and this was summertime, so you're probably talking somewhere after 9 o'clock. It was in August, the beginnings of August. So somewhere around 9 or so, it was getting dark, and I was just coming to my cousin's house. So quite a ways, I'd gone quite a ways and decided, well, I'm probably closer to my cousin's house than I am to Granny's, so I just kept on going. And I probably should have turned back hours before this, but I ended up coming up on their house, and about the time it started getting dark, I was getting a little nervous about this little dog kept looking off to the side, and I was hearing cracks and stuff like that. I thought maybe it was a bear, so I started looking real carefully as it was getting dark, because I thought, well, the bear might not bother me in the daytime, but I don't know what it would do, if it could get to me under the cover of darkness. So I started paying a little more attention to what the dog was doing and that. And about the time it was getting dark enough for me to get real worried, I actually ran across my cousin's house, and they lived back in a holler. Wasn't quite surrounded by trees like Granny's. So when I got up, when I got to the top of the finger ridge next to their house, I could actually look down and see their house and their cars and stuff like that. Whereas Granny's, you get to the top of the finger ridge and all you see is trees. So I got down there, went to their house, and that was the end of that situation. In hindsight, I'm pretty sure that what it was is I was being paralleled by the Bigfoot that I saw looking in the window later on that summer, a couple of weeks after that. Now, another incident that happened was me and my cousins would mess around in the barn that was out behind Granny's. And it stunk really bad in there. We just chalked it up to they had left some hay up in the loft that had been there for forever. I don't know, a year, a couple of years, whatever. And just thought, well, it just stinks like that because that hay's gone bad and it's got, mold and all kinds of crap coming off of it. But it stunk like what your typical description of a Sasquatch is. It stunk like a mixture of like wet dog and, well, really, if you think of a dog that got sprayed by a skunk and was wet, that would kind of, because it's a wet, skunky dog smell. That's kind of what it was. But, we were kids. We didn't care. We went back there and messed around anyway. Well, one time I was back there. Now, this little dog that walked with me to my cousin's house had disappeared. And we all just figured it went off and died because during that summer I kept trying. It had gotten, there's this kind of fly that can land on an animal and it'll lay an egg, and that egg becomes a little like a grub worm or something. It only does the one baby. It's not like a bunch of maggots or something, but it lays this one worm, and this worm will burrow its way into the skin, and it will eat the flesh of the live animal until it emerges as a fly, I guess. And at least that's what I was told. I don't know the exact, what it really was, or if that's even completely accurate, but I knew this little dog had this little worm in its neck, and it was right next to its jugular vein. And I tried to get it out. We couldn't get it out. Granny tried to get it out, and we just said, short of taking it to a vet, I guess, and have it removed. And they're a country. The dog was just the dog that stayed out in the yard all the time, and there was a few of them out there, and they weren't going to drive it. I guess the nearest vet was probably an hour's drive away, so the dog was left to fend for itself. It would eat a liver. It wouldn't. And so when the dog disappeared, we all just figured the dog went off and died somewhere. Well, a couple of weeks went by, and I was out. This was shortly before my mother come down to pick us up. And I was out messing around in the barn and noticed, that smell seemed to be stronger and stuff like that. So I didn't mess around in the barn too long. And I was coming back. The dirt road was one of those situations where it was so rarely used that you could see tire marks going back towards the barn, but it was like overgrown with weeds and stuff, like in between the tires and to the sides of the tires, and even there would be like grass and stuff, so you could see like the indent where a vehicle had driven through the mud and left the two indents of where the tires went. But to the sides and in the middle, it was all overgrown, and there was even some growth where the tires would be. But you could still tell where the road was. Well, I was walking along the side of it, going back towards Granny's house, and I run across that little dog. Well, that little dog, and at first I was, a little upset. I was a kid, and I liked the little dog. But then curiosity and kind of amazement overtook me when I realized that this little dog was like mushed in the mud. And now there wasn't mud at that time, but we had rain between the time the dog disappeared and the time that I ran across its dead body. But I couldn't understand how this dog was mashed into the ground as if it had been squished into the mud after it had rained. So I was looking at it, and it was covered in maggots and stuff, and I got a stick and picked it up, and its skin just kind of peeled off. But its head was mashed, its whole body was mashed flat into the ground as if something had run over it. And I was thinking, well, it looks like a vehicle had run over it. However, no vehicles had been back there, because Granny never used that barn. Granny was running the house, and she had the little area behind the house where she had some hogs in a pen, and she had some chickens running around and that kind of thing. But she only used the house and the smokehouse that was behind it. She never went back to the barn, which was about 50 yards behind the house. Well, this little dog was only maybe 5 or 10 yards outside the entrance of the barn. It was pretty close to the barn, so nobody had been back there. And I knew no vehicles had driven back there. So I was a little perplexed as to how this dog was mashed into the dirt back there. And I didn't think about it at the time, but when Wes and Will had asked me about it, and I thought back about this dog being mashed in it, I remembered, because I can remember seeing the dogs laying there, that the dog was mashed into the mud, but only like from its rear legs were not mashed into the dirt, only from there up was. And it had a flat area that was packed down around its body, but it wasn't from a tire running through there, which was one of the things I remembered was odd, was that it looked like something had driven through there, but only in that one spot. In other words, it was a footprint. But at the time, I didn't put it together that it was a footprint. I just realized it was a big spot where something had squished it down into the dirt. And that was probably maybe a week before I saw that Sasquatch in the window looking at us. And if you want to hear more about the Sasquatch looking in the window, you can listen to the other episode, Eye to Eye with Bigfoot. That's what it's called. It's episode 1. My next encounter actually occurred years later. I was, I was 18 or 19. And I had, in the between these encounters when I was 13 and this encounter I'm about to talk to you about, I'd moved to Kentucky to live with my father for a while, because we had lived with my mother, and then my mother didn't tell us, but she had a cancer scare, thought she was going to die, and she sent me to live with my father, and my sister actually went and lived with Granny. And then later, a few months later, after she had finished that school year, she went and lived with my father too. And then we moved back up to Boston and lived with my mother after it turned out, it wasn't cancer. It was another issue. So when we were living, we were back in Boston, my friends and I went camping. We decided we're going to go on a road trip, and my friend had thrown a tent in the trunk, and we were going to go on a road trip and go camping. And we were 18, 19, some illegal substances were involved in this whole decision to go on the road trip. By the time we actually found a campground, the illegal substances had worn off, and we kind of just wanted to go home and go to sleep. But we were, by the time we had gotten to this point, we were up in New Hampshire, in northern New Hampshire, in the Kangamangas Mountains, or the White Mountains, along somewhere around the Kangamangas Highway. So we had to find a place to camp for the night and then head back. So we got on this long road. I thought it was the Kangamangas Highway, but when I look on Google Earth, the Kangamangas Highway doesn't seem, at least what's labeled on Google Earth, is not in the area where we were. We were up in northern New Hampshire. And we got on this long road that said the next gas station is like 210 miles or something. And we started driving down this road. And next thing we knew, we had started to kind of, straighten up, and get our senses back. The illegal substances were running out of our system, were wearing off. And I was driving, and I suddenly look at the gas gauge, and we only had, I think it was just barely above E. It was like the needle and the line next to E were touching each other. And I said, well, we have to find a gas station. And the guy in the back seat, Andy, he says, well, there's not a gas station for like at least another 100 miles, because back there we passed a sign that said next gas station 200 and something miles, and that was a while ago, but it wasn't that long ago. So we were going up and down these mountains on this road, and every time we go down the mountain, I'd put the car in neutral and let it coast. And it actually kept about a 50 to 60 mile an hour speed going, and sometimes it would even go over the speed limit. So they were pretty good downward slopes, and that was the only way we were able to milk it for as long as we did. But we were at the point when the needle was below E, and we knew we were about to run out of gas. We had to find a campground. Now we're figuring all along that there's got to be a campground along this mountain. I mean, we're in the middle of the woods. I believe it was a national forest. There's got to be some campgrounds here. So finally we run across I don't know, I think it might have been a KOA, but this was back in the early 80s, and they weren't quite as posh as they are now, where you go in and there's an office, and they're basically big parking lots or whatever. The campgrounds back then, you would pull in, and you would go to this old shack and say, I want a campground, and they tell you, all right, go down the road and find the first clearing and you can camp. Well, this campground was a little different. It was more of there wasn't no office. It was just, you pulled off on this dirt road, and it made this big circle in the woods, and there were like these little clearings off on the sides of the road as you drove around. And we drove around, and every single one of the clearings was taken. We come back around towards where we pulled in, and there was a clearing. It was a smaller clearing, but it wasn't like there was any place to park. And it was just a patch of grass, basically. And there was a water spigot there. And we kind of figured this was just where you got water. You weren't really supposed to camp there, but we were like, well, we got no other choice. And it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. So we said, to heck with it. We'll just set up a tent here. It doesn't look like anyone ever comes around here anyway, other than the people camping. And they were all sleeping. Nobody's going to care. So we set up our tent. About the time we literally were driving the last tent peg in, this ranger comes pulling in. And he comes up to us and says, you can't camp here. I was like, well, we have to. We're like, we have no gas. We just want to camp for the night, and in the morning have somebody take us to get some gas so we can, make it to the next town. And I asked the guy, I said, well, how far is the next town anyway? And he said it was, I think he said it was 38 miles or something. So we made it quite a distance coasting down hills in neutral. But anyway, he tells us we can't camp there. We said, well, what are we going to do? I mean, we're literally below E. We're on fumes. We're not going to make it more than a couple more miles on the gas that we have. And he said, well, there's a hunting campsite that's just down the road. What you do is you go up here. He says, I'm not supposed to send anybody camping there, but it's a place I know of. that hunters go and they camp back up in there. He said, go down the road. It's just a couple of miles up the road. You'll see a clearing on the left. That's just this little spot in the trees where it's a little bare, which is basically like if you're going to Granny's house, what I was describing. This is what he's describing to me. And I said, okay, I know what he's talking about. And you go up in there, and you'll go up the side of the mountain a little ways, and then the road will fork left and right. You want to go to the right because I've already sent somebody to the left. I said, okay. He said, you'll go up there, up that little path, dirt path basically, a little ways, and then you'll come to a clearing at the end, and just go ahead and you can camp there and then get your gas in the morning. I said, okay. So we drive up the road, and we're like getting 5 miles up the road, and I'm like really getting worried we're about to run out of gas, and I'm not seeing the spot where this guy told us to turn off. But finally we get to it, but it was more like 5, 6. He told us it was like 2 miles. It was more like 5 or 6 miles. And we get up there, we pull up in there, and this is even worse than trying to get to Granny's house, because the branches actually went all the way across the road and were like twisted into each other going across the road. So we were basically, the car had to push its way through the branches to go up here. So we go up there and we find the fork, we go to the right, we get up to the clearing. We get the tent out, and it's pitch black, there's no moon. And the only light you can see, I don't know if you've ever been out in the country where there's absolutely no city lights. But even then, if you look up at the sky, it's got kind of a little bit of a light hue to it, and you can see the stars and that kind of thing. That's basically all the light there was. Possibly there was a partial moon at best, but it was dark. So we left the headlights on while we were setting up our tent and getting our campfire going. Well, in order to get the campfire going, usually you can walk around the perimeter of the little clearing and pick up sticks and stuff like that. Well, we did. At best, we got a little bit of kindling, and that was it, around the side of this little clearing. And it was very little. It was probably only 10 or 20 feet around. It was very small. So we decided, well, we're going to have to go out in the woods and look for some sticks. Now, I guess there probably wasn't a little bit of a moon, because there was enough light, even when, I don't know if our eyes just adjusted or what, or possibly it was the light coming from the headlights of the car. But there was enough where if you looked really hard, you could actually see the ground you were walking on and stuff like that. And we went back in the woods. At least I thought we were going back in the woods. Me and my friend Rob we went in 2 different directions. He went to the left side of the clearing, and from the front of the car, farther away from the car, up the mountain. He went to the left, I went to the right, and we went walking through the woods looking for sticks laying on the ground to make a fire. So I walked back up in there, and I run across a dry creek bed that goes up the side of the mountain. And I walked down into it. I figured I'm going to find some dead sticks down here, which I did. I found some dead sticks in there, and I had to take a piss, so I stopped to take a piss. So while I'm standing there, I start hearing somebody walking around at the top of the creek bed. The creek bed it was like a little bank that you climbed down a little bank into the creek bed, and there was a little bank went up the other side. And there were no trees down in there. There were trees up at the top of the banks. So I'm down there taking a piss, and I hear my friend Rob walk up behind me where I'd climbed down. And I turn around and I go, I can hear you up there, Rob. And he doesn't say anything. So I turn around and look up, and I could see his silhouette standing there. Now, it was kind of cold, so we were wearing coats. So I could see him standing up there. I said, I can see you standing there, Rob. And he still doesn't say anything. So I finish taking a leak, pick up my sticks, and I climb up the side of the bank again, and I look for him, and I'm like, well, he was standing I look right next to the tree where I saw him, and I don't see him. So I go ahead and I walk back to where we were camping. And I walk up and I put the wood down and I said, well, why didn't you say anything to me? He goes, what are you talking about? I said, when you come up there while I was taking a piss down in the creek bed, why didn't, what were you trying to scare me? He goes, I never went over there. I was like, come on now. He says, no, I was never over there. And Andy pipes up and he says, he never even left the clearing. He was too afraid to go out there, which I thought was funny, and we laughed it off. And I just figured it was probably somebody from the other campsite that the left fork. They were probably out looking for wood themselves and didn't say anything and just walked away. And actually, we had talked about, well, maybe we should go over there, maybe they get some beers or something, but we decided not to, because I was the only one brave enough to walk out beyond the firelight. So we're sitting there and we ate some hot dogs and stuff, and then we start hearing these cracks and stuff happening around the clearing. And my friends are like, oh my God, what is that? Now, they were actually some pretty substantial stick breaks, but I know that when you're out in the woods, you can hear a stick break and it'll sound massive, but it could just be the way the sound carries, and it's actually a raccoon or something. So I just wrote it off as that it's just the sounds are just being amplified by the woods. And I told them, don't worry about it, it's just some squirrels or something. And we heard these things, and it was getting a little unnerving. We kept hearing these sounds all around the clearing out in the woods. So we all kind of got in the tent. It was really a 2-man tent, but all 3 of us squeezed in there and with our heads out the front door. And we had the fire like maybe a few feet out the front door. I stayed awake and kept the fire going because I was getting a little concerned. I knew that the sound gets amplified and all that, but it was still a little unnerving. So I kept the fire going as long as I could. I finally fell asleep. They were already asleep. I finally fell asleep. We wake up in the morning. The fire's out. We take the tent down. We get ready to go. I turn the key on the car and the car won't start. The battery's dead. We had left the headlights on the entire time. So we had to, well, I don't really need to get into the rest of the story. Just we had to coast the car down through the woods to the road, and we ended up hitching a ride to town. But thinking back, the person I saw, the shadow I saw standing at the top of the creek bed bank. Now I remember seeing somebody that was maybe from just below the waist. I could see somebody standing there. I could see their silhouette, and it looked like somebody wearing a big bulky jacket. But I don't know that they were standing right at the edge of the creek bed. They could have been standing farther back if they were bigger, like say a Bigfoot. If a Bigfoot had been standing, say, I don't know, 10 feet back from the edge of the bank, it would have looked like somebody could have been standing a lot closer. So I have no idea how far back they were standing, but I know that my friends didn't venture beyond the clearing, but somebody was up there. I heard them walk up. I looked up and I saw the silhouettes just standing there, like they were just looking at me. And then when I went up and looked for who I thought was my friend, I didn't see anybody. However, when Wes and Will had asked me about that, I commented that if in that situation, if I come up to the top of the creek bed and I start looking around, I'm looking for my friend. I'm 6'4". Pretty much everybody I meet is shorter than me. Very few people are my size or, taller. So I'm usually looking for somebody at a certain level, eye level, I'm looking for heads at eye level. If I went up there and I started looking around, scanning my surroundings in the dark, I'm going to be looking for the silhouette of somebody who's, 5'10" or shorter, basically. And that's what I would look for. If I could have looked directly at a Bigfoot standing 10 feet from me, And I would have just assumed it was a tree because I'm not going to be looking up for head and shoulders. I'm going to be looking kind of down for head and shoulders. So it's quite possible that the Bigfoot that was standing there could have still been standing there, and I wouldn't have realized it because I would have just assumed there was a tree there and kept looking for a person-sized silhouette. So I have no idea if that Bigfoot was still there or if it left. I never heard it leave. I heard it come up to me, but I never heard it leave. And I was a little surprised that my friend was that stealthy, that he walked up to me, but then I didn't hear him walk away. So that would be my, what would that have been? 1, 3, 4, fourth encounter with a Bigfoot. Now, that's my assumption. I don't know that there was a Bigfoot there. I guess it could have been one of the other people camping at the other site. However, I'm pretty sure that those forks were pretty far away. And I mean, we never heard these people. We never saw their firelight or anything like that. So they had to have been a good distance. That other clearing was probably a pretty good distance from where we were camping. So the likelihood that it was one of them is pretty slim. And if it was, they probably would have said, "Oh, sorry, it's just me. We're camping over at the other side," or something like that. But not just stand there, stare at me, and say nothing. Completely motionless. Unlike other people who have seen Sasquatch, it didn't start swaying back and forth. It was just standing there looking at me. Assuming it was a Bigfoot. Now, when I was walking with the dog up in the woods, I never saw anything. I just heard a lot of cracks and carrying on, and the dog kept alerting me to something off to my right. Might not have been a Bigfoot. It could have been a black bear, for all I know. But I would have thought I'd see a black bear at some point, I saw nothing. I just heard sounds. As far as the dog being squished in, I know nothing went back there, but in his skull was crushed. So something heavy did mash him into the dirt or the mud or whatever. I have no idea. Maybe at some point when we were all out at the store or something, somebody did drive back there and drove over the dog I'm sure it had already died when this happened, I assume. If somebody drove over it, that would have been the case. It would have been dead from the thing in its neck and they drove over it. Or it could have been a Bigfoot that stomped on it because it was the same Bigfoot that was following me and the dog pissed it off and it stepped on it. Could have been that. But now, as far as I wanted to make some comments about when the Bigfoot looked in the window, and we're already at 42 minutes. I think I had said in my last show that I was going to start making these only 30 minutes, but I'll try to cut it short here. The whole idea, I don't do Bigfoot research or Sasquatch research, however you want to put it. I'm thinking about doing it, but I'm going to be completely honest with you folks. The whole idea of going out there and finding one terrifies me. And the reason it terrifies me is because of the one that looked in the window. Because I tell you, when I was looking, I stared eye to eye with this thing for at least 20-30 seconds. And I stared at it before it realized that I saw it. I stared at it for a good minute before that. And about the time I started getting nervous is when it looked at me. And then we locked eyes for a good 20-30 seconds. But during that time, I just knew that there was intelligence there, that this thing was thinking. And the whole idea, I would really prefer to find out that these things are just animals. They're just dumb animals, which is what some people are trying to say. I would prefer to find that out. If I knew that, I would go out in the woods and I would do Sasquatch research and I would look for them. Because then all you have to do is worry about, acting right. Like when a gorilla bluff charges you, you just stand still, that kind of stuff. And then it'll walk away normally. And then you just retreat after that. That kind of thing. But what I saw looking in the window was not a dumb animal. This thing, you could tell it had intelligence, that it was paying attention to what us kids were talking about. It was enjoying listening to us. And then when it noticed that I saw it, it realized that I saw it. And it was thinking about what to do about me seeing it. And had I not got terrified and ran out of the room, I don't know what the thing would have done. Maybe it would have got pissed off and beat its way into the house, because obviously they're strong enough, they could pound their way through a door or a window or whatever and done something. Maybe the fact that I ran off in the other direction and it had an opportunity to retreat was the only reason it didn't do anything. I don't know. But what I do know is that I saw intelligence in the eyes, and that fact just terrifies me, because it means that you're not out there just dealing with an animal. You're out there dealing with something that, depending on what you run into, it could hunt you. It could reason. It can have tactical thoughts. It can, lay in wait. It could work in groups with others with intelligence. I'm not just talking about basic pack animal stuff here. I'm talking about, plans, and that just terrifies me. The thought that, that there's an animal out there that, if they thought about it long enough, I'm half expecting that any day we're going to hear about a group of Sasquatch coming into a town and, just attacking people. I know that there's Indian legends about Sasquatch coming into villages and, taking kids and people and taking them off and eating them. At least I guess that's what they suppose they do, is eat them. I don't see why that would not be what they're doing. But I'm half expecting to start hearing about that any time that Sasquatch are coming into small towns and carrying off kids and people, the same way that they did with the Indian villages. And I assume that the reason that they don't is because our towns and so forth, we have cars, we have lights, we have electricity, we have houses that are a little harder than just teepees to get into. And if you think about what Indian villages would have been like back then, it would have been like a bunch of people camping, so it would be a lot easier to lay waste to those kind of encampments than it is, bricks and sticks, let's say. We'll call it bricks and sticks houses. It's a little bit harder for them to gain access to us. It's a little bit harder for them to sneak up on us because they're, we have neighbors who can look out windows that they can't just grab a hold of and things like that. But I wouldn't be surprised to start hearing that Sasquatch are doing those kinds of things soon. Based on the intelligence I saw, I believe the Sasquatch I saw was a juvenile. And I think it was not as sure of itself as, say, a much older male. And the reason I think it was juvenile is because it didn't have as much facial hair as other people describe. And you can see that in my images. I put multiple images of different stages, like with facial hair, without facial hair. But the one I saw didn't have very much facial hair. But it did have the crags in its face and so forth. but I saw the intelligence in the eyes, and I guess the thing that really terrifies me is that it wasn't a person, because you can deal with a person. You know, even if it's a person that doesn't speak the language, you can deal with them. They know that if you point a gun at them, that you could shoot them and kill them. But this thing was more like an animal that is very intelligent, that has the intelligence close to a human. I would probably say what I saw was the intelligence of about maybe a 5th grader or a 4th grader. You know, a grade school kid kind of intelligence, or somebody who's a little slow, that kind of thing. So you imagine somebody like that with the power and the instincts of a predator, and the intelligence, just enough intelligence. I mean, you ever heard the saying, they know enough to be dangerous? That's kind of what it is. Bigfoots are intelligent enough to be more dangerous than another predator, like a cougar or something. You know, you can scare a cougar and it'll run away. You scare a Bigfoot, it'll run away until you don't see it anymore, and then it could come around behind you and, you know, hit you in the head with a rock or something and kill you and then eat you. You know, it just, the whole idea that they have that kind of intelligence is terrifying. Now, most of the time, I guess they're pretty docile and they don't do anything, but like some people have said, Sasquatch are like people. You have some that are assholes and you have some that are nice. Well, what terrifies me is going out there doing research and running into the asshole that's smart enough to outwit me in the woods. So, anyway, the show's running long. I guess that's it. Please share, comment, like, subscribe, whatever, depending on whether you're seeing this on YouTube or Blog Talk Radio. And I will have another show here coming soon. So if you want to share your story, get a hold of me. It's Sasquatch Hypotheses at gmail.com. And I'd be happy to have you on the show. Tell your story. I also want to make one comment before I close out the show. And that is that I have said things in one of my other episodes about government conspiracies and stuff, and how a lot of it's bullshit and all this. Listen, if you have had a situation where the government has come out and told you not to talk about this and that, I would love to hear your story. And I'm not going to browbeat you and say, oh, you're lying and all of this stuff. But I do have the experience in that area, and I will be able to tell you if it's somebody pulling one over on you, because I'm sure from a lot of your perspectives, if this has happened to you, that you really believe that this was the government. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I can tell you with a pretty good percentage of surety whether it was or it wasn't, or whether it could have been. You know, if they're following the right procedures and they're acting in accordance to the way things are done when you're doing that kind of operation, I can tell you it sounds like that's probably what it was. And I can tell you, no, it's probably some, private company or something who sends somebody out here to pretend and represent themselves as this. But I'm not wanting to browbeat the person who's talking about this happening to them. I'm just, in that other episode, I was just talking about the specifics that were related were not correct in those specific stories. I mean, I did point out a couple who I think they might have been just embellishing. Maybe it really happened and they were embellishing a little bit or whatever. But the things that they were saying themselves weren't ringing true either. However, as far as the all of the people out there who are saying this is happening to them, I don't believe everybody's lying about it. And I would like to hear the story and maybe help you clarify whether it's something you should be concerned about or not, or what you should do if it happens again, that kind of thing. Anyway, that's the end of it. Send me an email. Let me know you want to come on the show. We'll have you on the show. And until then, y'all have a good night.
So we're back from the dead. We're back from the dead.
Hell yeah.
We're back from the dead.
Are you ready? Let's go. Back from the dead.
We're back from the dead.
Hell yeah.
We're back from the dead. Back from the dead. Back from the dead.